Hi everyone. This is going to be a follow-up from our previous video, programming the set and reset conveyor. Um, I felt this was a good time to introduce the idea and the concept of a function and function blocks in TIA Portal. This is one of the main program organization tools that we have, and we use function blocks and functions to encapsulate specific aspects of our code and make it more reusable for us. This is going to build towards the use of libraries, both external and internal libraries for projects. That'll come over the next couple episodes as we dive into more complex programming, and we'll see that there are circumstances where rather than programming everything from the ground up, we can actually greatly speed up our workflow by having libraries of pre-built functionality that we know that we're going to be using over and over again. So we're going to start with like the kind of like the foundational level here about how we go about encapsulating code and making it more reusable in TIA Portal. So, looking at our previous project, all of our code actually runs in the main program cycle here, which from a best practices perspective is not ideal. What we're going to do is we're going to break this code out into two specific function blocks, or technically three specific function blocks that are going to work together to describe the overall functionality that we see here. So just as a preview or a reminder of what we're working with, going to download this to device real quick so that we are set up. We're going to go online with our PLC and we're going to monitor our PLC. This is the program that we came up with in the last video. We can see that we've essentially created a set reset functionality where we turn our main conveyor on and then leave it on when we break the first sensor, and then we turn it back off when we break the second sensor. Do that, let that finish one more time. So that's where we're at right now. Now the task is going to be, instead of having all of this program logic run in main OB, we're going to break it out into functions so that we can make this a more set of reusable code and organize this program slightly differently. So to get started, we're going to add some new blocks here. The first one that we're going to add is a function block. And we're going to call this, I typically, when I'm naming function blocks or any of the different blocks here, when I'm adding them to a project, I typically lead with a descriptor of what it is, a shorthand. So here you can see that each one of these is labeled OB, FB, FC, and DB. I tend to follow that naming convention in TIA Portal. So if I'm creating a function block, I'm going to say FB dash and then the function's name. And I'm just going to call this function conveyor. And I'm going to hit enter to create that. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to add two more functions. These are not going to be function blocks. These are going to be functions down here. And we're going to call this first one fc-conveyor run. And then we're going to create another one called fc-conveyor stop. And these three functions are going to encapsulate the explicit code that we wrote here. And we're going to go through the process of like how this is actually structured. So I'm going to maximize TIA Portal now, and then I'm going to kind of split my view so we can look at a couple different things simultaneously. If you would like to split the editor to view multiple windows simultaneously, they have two options. You can split the editor horizontally, or you can split it vertically up at the top, just to the left of the search project bar. I like to split vertically. It makes more sense to me. So here in main OB, we're going to leave main OB there for the time being, although we are going to go offline with our PLC because we're going to make some pretty heavy modifications to the PLC code. And for this window here, this first scene that we're looking at, FC conveyor run, we're going to copy and paste that first network, and then we can delete that other one that got added. We're going to do the same thing for conveyor stop functionality. We're going to paste there, delete that. Then in our main OB, we are going to delete these two. So now we have nothing in the main OB, but each of our functions contains one of the networks from the previous program. In our conveyor function, that is the function block FB1 conveyor, we are going to call these two previous functions. So just follow along with me for a moment here. We'll get into how this structure is actually running in just a sec. To add functions to a program, you can simply drag and drop them onto a network inside of a function block or an organization block or another function. So now that we're here, we have a function block that is calling the functions conveyor run and conveyor stop. And this is the first level of encapsulation that we're working with. What we've done here is that if we have to create another conveyor, or we know we're going to interact with a second or third or fourth conveyor in a system, and they're going to be interacting with different pieces of I/O, they'll have different sensors associated with them, or maybe they are going to function slightly differently. We can, this function is where we can modify the conditions under which the conveyor is running or the conveyor is stopping, or maybe even add additional functionality in terms of like controlling conveyor speed. All of that stuff we can encapsulate into separate functions so that we can work on them in isolation. The next thing that we're going to do is, and then finally, what the last thing that we need to do is in the main OB, or our main like cyclic runtime, we need to make sure that we call the parent function here. And you can see that we're being prompted to create a data block. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on the data block right this moment, because I want to demonstrate that this organization is going to function exactly the same. But this data block in later videos and in later lessons will become a lot more important. And this is how we're going to organize essentially a standardized interface for all of the functionality that we need with any particular piece of equipment that we're going to create an instance of. So we're going to just hit OK. And so now inside of our main OB, we are calling conveyor FB conveyor, which is our parent function block, and then inside of FB conveyor, we are calling the functions conveyor run and conveyor stop. That basically describe the conditions under which the conveyor is going to run or stop, and vice versa. And then inside of those functions, we actually have the real logic that we'll be interacting with to run the conveyor. This whole system, if we're looking at this from the program or the program tree perspective, let me maximize that a little bit here so we can see this a little better. From this perspective, looking at the program block, or excuse me, the program blocks drop-down menu, if we have a ton of stuff in here, this is going to get complicated and kind of cumbersome to navigate effectively. So this is where we're going to start adding groups to our program tree so that we can more effectively organize different aspects of our program. So if we want to add a group, we just right click on the program blocks folder and then hit add group. I'm going to call this group machine for the time being. And then inside of this, we're going to add two more groups. One is going to be called instance data, and another is going to be called functions. We are going to put the functions under the functions group, and we are going to put the conveyor data block under the conveyor group, or under the instance data group. And so now if we are looking at everything inside of this, we can more appropriately navigate directly to a piece of information that we see or that we need. The main OB I leave at the top. I don't put it in another group. This is the main cycle. If you guys are familiar with void loop from the Arduino programming environment, main OB is essentially the equivalent of void loop. It's the top level program runtime that we are going to be putting everything else in. So it doesn't go inside of a group. It always stays at the very top. That's a stylistic choice on my part. There's nothing preventing you really from adding this to a group if you would like. In some cases, it might be beneficial to do that. That's just that's a stylistic choice. The other thing that we should be thinking about is adding groups to PLC tags. If we have tags that are going to be associated with specific pieces of equipment, I typically create a machine group that is responsible for managing those tags. And then under that machine group, if we have conveyors, robots, pick and place machines, any of the other equipment that's in the system we're programming, or any other modules that's in the system that we're programming, I tend to put them under this machine group folder. And so here, what this might look like is if we add a new group, I might call this the conveyor group, and that would go underneath conveyor. And if we had another group, that might be our like a sorting station, for example, and its associated IO would go under a different group underneath here. This is just the way that I like to organize programs. It's not necessarily a requirement to do this. However, it will make your life much easier as your program grows in complexity. But now I've kind of been rambling for a little bit now, and I would like to keep this video fairly short. So what we're going to do is I'm going to recompile this program now that I've made these changes. So we're going to compile hardware and software changes, and then we're going to upload that to our PLC. And continue, load. And then here, we are going to go online. And we're going to start monitoring our specific pieces of information here. And so I believe we have that. Let's stop. This is run. There's stop. Why are you being frustrating? Open up. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So what we've got here is we're looking at the stop functionality for the PLC, or not the PLC, for the conveyor, and the start functionality on the right for the conveyor. So now if we go to our program, I'm going to minimize this again, and we hit start, we can see that our programs function at just like before. But now if we wanted to create another version, we had multiple conveyors that we needed to interact with, we can copy, paste. This is conveyor 1 now. Copy, paste. These, and then we would just update the function calls, and we would have a whole new conveyor that we can just program normally. But for right now, we're going to call it here, and then we will look at how to work with encapsulated pieces of code in a more deliberate manner in some later videos. But I just wanted to introduce the topic of a function and a function block in TIA Portal, how you create them, how they relate to each other, and how they relate back to the main OB. And so just to be super explicit about what's happening when we're looking at these, close that for the time being. If we monitor main OB, we are calling the conveyor function. Let me reset this so that we can see this happen. So we're calling the conveyor function. Inside of the conveyor function, we are calling both of these functions, conveyor run and conveyor stop. And then each one of these is evaluating its own internal logic to monitor the state of the conveyor and run the code accordingly. So if we do this from here and we look at conveyor run, that's true right now. That stopped being true. If we move over to conveyor stop, that statement becomes true and we reset the conveyor just like that. So that's the end of this tutorial. Short introduction into the use of a function block and functions and how you can organize code inside of them. We'll look at how to move into utilizing those functions effectively in some later videos. Thanks so much for watching. Take it easy.